so that she doesn't have to introduce herself. I've known Sarah for many years, and I'm so happy that she's come with me, or I've come with her, depending on your perspective. But Sarah has written beautifully about Henry Miller, and we met actually at a conference where I was going to talk about some phototextual stuff, which I now cannot remember what was, which just shows how old I'm getting. But Sarah came up to me and said, "You've written on Henry Miller." And since then, I've become familiar with Sarah's work. She's also written on Henry Miller, probably, I think, one of the best pieces ever. Now you have to remind me of the title. Oh, bloody hell, this will come to me. The Dearest of Cemeteries. The Dearest of Cemeteries. And I read this, I remember really reading it and thinking, oh my God. There are people who can say a great deal in a very short amount of time and do it just so well and so compelling. But Sarah's also written at Ruche, is working now on a submission for this journal that I'm doing on Robert Frank, and is hands down just one of the best writers within, shall we say, American cultural studies, dealing with kind of text and image interaction and visual culture generally. Yes, I'm very excited to hear about watercolors.
Goodness, how do I follow that? Maybe we don't. Maybe we just leave the slides to speak. So what we have here, with apologies for their rough and readiness, is just my clips from the wonderful book, Paint As You Like and Die Happy. Right. So I'm not quite sure how much access people have to some of this Miller visual stuff. So I'll perhaps speak a little bit about where I found the writing, where things come from, where all of this is. And this should just roll to give you, say, a rough idea of these wonderful paintings. When I did this, I wasn't aware of how many lovely paintings would be around the corner from us. So go enjoy them in person. So in a 1931 letter to his friend, the artist Emil Schnellock, Miller tells of a great urge to paint that's built up as he's writing. He says, "Sometimes when I think of doing a watercolor, I get such a furious hunger and rage that I could destroy the book. I want to paint, if only watercolors. I know I'll paint again, and I don't give a damn whether people will recognize it as painting or not. It gives me great joy, and that's all I ask of it." Despite this lifelong love of watercolours, however, and the clear importance of them to Miller and the thousands of paintings that he did, luckily for me, there isn't a lot of academic work out there on Miller as a painter. And by a lot, I think probably none. If anyone knows any, please tell me. The sketch that follows is my first efforts to start that then. For the sake of manageability, my main corpus for this is the paintings reproduced in Paint As You Like and Die Happy and Gary Koppel's Centennial Retrospective book. And then the Miller writings that you mainly find the visual in is, I'm so sure you know, The Angel Is My Watermark, The Waters We Glitterize, and then there's the late essays, there's Paint As You Like and Die Happy, there's the very short ones that have been excerpted from the Schnellock letters, painting lesson, there's a few bits in the Twinker Thiebaud books, but it's quite scattered actually, which is interesting again. For me, the main excitement in Miller's work is a combination of that writing voice and his still compelling expression of what it feels like to incubate and create something. In his writing, Miller returned again and again to narrate an experiential version of painting, one that saw the painting as a joyful psychic event, and the picture as both the trace of that process and a gesture to the viewer of the joy of that process. Miller's painting practice both extends and counters his characteristic literary stream of consciousness approach. It channels the same associative energy that powers his writing into a more focused, meditative act. Miller's writing about the act of painting, and I've cut a whole section about ekphrasis here, so we may or may not want to go there, especially the work from the 30s, tells of painting as an expansive, flowing thing, but also a kind of focused activity too, where all of this movement gets channeled into the joy of making images and into a state of mind that for Miller is flow, freedom and play. And for those of you that know Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow and the creative process, I think that's behind this as well, right? I think this is that state. So the following beautiful but slightly long quote from To Paint Is to Love Again captures for me some of the elements I'm hoping to keep in play today. So this is Miller. Thinking back to the year 1928, when I first began making watercolours, it seemed to me that if I had not discovered this outlet, I would have gone insane. My writing was getting me nowhere fast, my domestic life was a shambles, and my ability to panhandle had become nil. I painted morning, noon, and night, and if I ran out of paint, I used crayons, pencils, or hunks of coal. Though my mind was intensely active, for I was seeing everything in a new light, the impression I had was of painting with some other part of my being. While I played, for I never looked on it as work, I whistled, hummed, danced on one foot, then the other, and talked to myself. If a crony stopped by to unload his woes, I continued to paint while pretending to listen. Sometimes I'd offer to do his portrait for a pack of cigarettes, 2 bits, even a dime. We weren't trying to get anywhere. We were there, were we not? So this sense of painting as an embodied social and spiritual practice runs throughout Miller's accounts of his watercolour work. Perhaps the most distinct and self-contained piece on painting is the one here that I suspect most folks here will be familiar with, which is The Angel is My Watermark in Black Spring, an episode where Miller is driven to write, eat, cycle, anything to get that creative restlessness mobilized. And a breathless painting session follows where he draws off some of this manic vigor by painting, following energetically through a series of ideas, through multiple surrealist associations, until the painting is destroyed, leaving nothing but, he says, the figure of an angel. For me, Fred Perles seems right when he speaks of the subjects of Miller's paintings as a pretext, and the Perles is in the Burn Porter Happy Rock bit. That's another place where you'd find this. There are repeated portraits, symbols, places, images in the corpus that we can get at now. I'm aware that what survives of this is so little compared to what Miller actually did, but what survives has these repeated tropes. But for me, my intuition is that these paintings are less about the making of an image of a person or a scene or an object, and more of an opportunity for an intense, absorbing and playful relationship between Miller, paper, pigment, brushes, water, and as he got into it, taps, scrubbing brushes, and later dunking them in the swimming pool. So this is a kind of phenomenological thing, but a very playful one. Miller writes in The Waters Reglitterize, "To paint is like communing with oneself, and with all the world too. I seem to carry on a perpetual conversation. The colours talk to me, I cajole them, I implore them." So painting for Miller had an intensely sociable element. It allowed Miller to remain productive when he was no longer writing essays or fiction. It gave him income and it connected him to other people. It's important, I think, that these paintings were either gifts or given away before, sometimes even before he starts painting them, or bestowed. They're sources of that kind of abundance that becomes more and more one of the central themes of that late work. In the post-war work, Miller's working his way towards a more benevolent outlook than we see in the tropics. But this part of this outlook, I think, is made possible by his ability to keep giving away these paintings. Right? This is this way of enacting this late sort of expansive Miller. The most moving of these moments between friends is, for me, a very late painting Miller made with Bill Pickering, which is reproduced, I think, in the couple book, called We Did It, Henry, which I don't have up here. It's painted and signed by both of them. It's a joint painting, and it's painted in the final days of Miller's life. So right into the last fortnight, and when he's only got sight in one eye, he's still painting, and he's painting with people. He's painting with Bill. So in Miller's work then, for me at least, we're dealing with a physical, phenomenological, movement and body-based description of painting, along with the associations and the emotions connected to the act. This in itself is distinctive. So Miller, in the pieces of writing we have, isn't talking to art history about the concepts behind specific paintings or the effects he's seeking to create for a viewer, or his journey from painting to painting as he gains skills or investigates particular kinds of subjects, or even of wider social context. He's speaking a little of tradition and influence, and folks in this room know his main interlocutors there. But these are more in the mode of his intertextual references, between his sort of bouncing between the other artists. What Miller thinks Picasso's doing, or who Hans Reichel is when he paints, and who Henry Miller wishes he was when he was painting. So Miller's painting is much more in the mode of what someone like John Dewey would call experiential, right? This is a heightened and an intensified mode of talking about painting. And I think, if we believe Miller, and this I think will become a touchstone, of doing the paintings themselves. This is giving witness to a heightened mode of interacting, this close looking. So, for Miller, there's a specific kind of hypnotism in evidence when he writes and speaks about his relationship with colour, for example. So you can see all this. And again, we can talk about colour lately. I brought my Miller books into my 90-year-old art teacher and said, talk about this. What can we say about colour? So there's some things we can do. But the names of the colours capture something of the joy for him and for his reader. And this is Miller. Itching to paint, I concentrate on colour. Miller had a fascination with the pigments as they were squeezed out of the tube, Lepska explains. He would say, more rose madder, more crimson alizarin, more scarlet lake. So another one of the important aspects here is the sense of a beginner's exploratory mindset. And obviously this is right in keeping with his reading of Zen. The sense that evaluation of these paintings according to public or historic standards is kind of beside the point. So obviously there is a conversation you can have about whether these are good paintings or not. But I think for me, the act of doing them actually is the most valuable thing, rather than that sense of sort of how they match against X or Y modernist painter. And for Miller, they have validity even if they are artistically flawed. So staging the making of paintings as play, as he does, as inconsequential but intimate, allows for a mode, I think, that when you paint, begins to allow you to fend off self-consciousness. And this is one of the key moments, I think. Sort of painting allows Miller to get beyond self-consciousness, to sort of enter into this incredibly intense relationship. This drive for a mode of creation that gets at something behind self-consciousness is embedded in Miller's accounts of writing, but it's also what I think he seeks in doing these paintings. Miller writes, for me to acquire the slightest technique is always a long and joyous process. My watercolours are always voyages of adventure, and whether successful, in inverted commas, or unsuccessful, they give me real satisfaction. One of the important things I learned in making watercolours was not to worry, not to care too much. I think it was Picasso who said, not every picture has to be a masterpiece. Precisely, to paint is the thing, to paint each day, not to turn out masterpieces, Miller says. So this might be an evasion in some ways, but it's a smart one, I think, because lowering the bar creates exactly the right psychic conditions to make things in. I think this is one of the moves whereby if you're trying to make something, talking to yourself about, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You know, this is about the paint. This is the moment. This is one of the engines that keeps that incredible production going, I think. And it's one of the contributors, I also think, to the sense of flow that we can see in Miller's descriptions of paintings and in the paintings themselves. So I'm using the word flow deliberately to evoke both the abstract sense of a spirit underlying the world that I take to be what Miller means in his pastiche of James Joyce in Tropic of Cancer. I love everything that flows. And that sense of being driven to paint, and I guess this is Miller. When I take up the brush, I'm so prepossessed with the idea of making something resemble something that I lose all track of reality, he writes. So this flow state has its literary analogue in the stream of association we get in, for example, the Obverian trolley interludes, or in The Angel Is My Watermark, where a horse becomes a zebra, becomes an angel, becomes the universe. Miller's lifelong quest to write himself into a wholehearted, whole-minded acceptance, and I think that word acceptance is really, really important, particularly for those late works, is played out as he paints, as he accepts and lets stand what might, in a different painter's practice, be seen as mistakes, or what might stay in the sketchbook. So free association is the literary vehicle to convey that here in the writing, and it's very much part of the surrealist heritage that Miller and Nassian inflected in their work and in their letters. That sense of one thing leading to another that gets at a truer sense of being, or a truer sense of the person. Association is the way you get into something new, something underneath. So in the psychoanalytic tradition, of course, this free associations reveal the preoccupation of the self. I'm not sure how useful that is for these paintings, just because I think it doesn't seem to me that these are paintings that there's terribly much hidden in, actually. I think if Miller is obsessing over a woman's face, it's there again and again. It's the Purloined Letter, it's all on there. There's stars, there's astrological symbols. So instead, for me at least, it's just as useful to think more of an experience of association being connected to these things, of movement, of being carried along by sentences or by the quest to make line and colour relate to one another, or to create a pair of eyes or a clown-like figure. And of course, Miller's medium was generally watercolour, which depends on this experience of fluidity. As one mixes pigment with water and you paint wet into wet, you use water to move the paint around. Miller's drawings are very interesting as well, in that a lot of the time, particularly in what I think are the early ones, he uses a continuous line. He doesn't take the pen off the paper very much. So again, it's this quality of one thing to another to another. It's an incredible focus. They call it contour drawing. He does lots of that. Which brings me to my final point, which is about self-enchantment and the allure of painting, I think, being precisely that compulsive feeling of following a path set by the relationship between a person in motion and the pigment and the water, where one is actually taken outside of oneself, and where one accepts the things that happens on the page, and where actually one leaves it and one gives it to other people. And that moment where he doesn't say, no, that's wrong, or that one might stay on the floor, but actually says, no, this is the authentic thing, this is the gift, right? So I'm not pitching for painting here as that romantic idea expression. I don't know whether that's quite as useful here, where one has an idea or feeling and you exercise it by putting it on the page. Instead, I'm thinking this is something more like being delivered from yourself by this intense concentration on lines, layers, colours, precisely what isn't you, actually. So this is, we have this incredible autobiographical voice, which is forensically examining Miller's history. But for painting, it seems to be that this is the concentration on the not you, right? This is a kind of paradoxical freedom. If the muse is with you, there's nothing else there and the everyday world slips away. The quality and intensity of looking that needs to switch on for one to be able to create a drawing or painting, I think, is what does this. So I'm interested in what Caroline was saying about very close looking. For me, the close looking is incredibly important. Miller describes it as a kind of intense attention, a defamiliarization. And this is Miller. Once you begin to concentrate this way, it's amazing what you discover, he writes. You can look at things all your life and not see them really. And this seeing, and this is Miller still, is in a way a not seeing, if you follow me. It's more of a search for something in which, being blindfolded, you develop the tactile, the olfactory, the auditory senses, and thus see for the first time. End Henry quote. Elsewhere, Miller describes this as a practice of love and of belief, and belief is why I was thinking about self-enchantment. That moment where uncynically he's committing to this. Right? The engine of belief, I think, is part of what's driving this love and this commitment to doing these things throughout his entire life. So he says, in love, self is obliterated. Only the beloved counts. Whether the beloved be a bowl of fruit, a pastoral scene, or the interior of a bawdy house makes no difference. One must be in it and of it wholly. End quote. This single-mindedness, for me, I think, is hard won. So this is my answer to the question of sort of this happiness. Is the happiness inherent, or is there some effort to it? I think these works are part of talking oneself into another state of mind. They're part of this, the tools you have to live with, right, to change your mood, change where you are, to become someone else. And you see Miller's labour, I think, in getting there in The Waters Reglitterize, and this is Miller. Even the biggest artist has to wage a constant fight against distraction. He's conscious not only of the future opinions of the critics, the price it will fetch or not fetch, the value of his tubes, the nicety of his choice of colour or line, but also the temperature of the room, the stains on the floor, the bath he forgot to take, and so on. In this sense, making pictures is potentially redemptive, because if Miller can indeed enter flow, it allows for escape from that spiral of selfhood that we see in the autobiographical books. Miller was very excited about his paintings, Carol Klein tells us, And he says his creative inspiration comes to him from outside himself. He'd call me up and say, I can't believe I just did this. I don't know where it came from, but here it is. This is my last paragraph.